All right. Well, I think we're going to go ahead and get started now. We have a good number of participants. So, welcome to our webinar. I'm Bram Wessel. I'm the co-founder of Factor. And as you hopefully know, Factor is an information architecture and taxonomy consulting company where we solve large-scale enterprise information problems. Our customers are usually Fortune 500 companies, that are operating at, a significant scale. So thank you for joining us today to talk to us about future-proofing your organization's taxonomy with a governance plan. Now I'm going to turn it over to, we have Paula Little and Connor Cantrell who are joining us, and they're going to take you through the webinar. So take us away, Paula.
Thanks, Bram. It's so exciting to see so many people from representing all areas of the US, so that's great. Hello, I'm Paula Little, and I'm an information architect here at Factor. I have been a practitioner actually for most of my career in content and records management, content strategy, digital archives, and of course, the odd taxonomy. I came to Factor a little bit over 3 years ago, and I'm really enjoying the large breadth of the problems we were able to solve for our clients.
And I am Connor Cantrell. Before I came to Factor about 1.5 years ago, I worked in academic libraries for almost a decade. So that's where I learned to love a good spreadsheet and to practice design thinking. Like Paula, I love the kinds of information problems we work on at Factor, but I am still known to reorganize the occasional bookshelf.
Who isn't? So let's begin our adventure into the wonderful world of taxonomy governance. At Factor, we see these 3 goals as our foundational assumptions to our taxonomy work. That is to create a taxonomy that is a strategic asset that has quantifiable value, a center of excellence that is always improving, a real-time digital self-service platform. Our ultimate goal is to create a living, evolving, and responsive taxonomy as a service that allows an organization to achieve its strategic goals and maintain them over time. However, the ability to reach this goal and succeed in your taxonomy initiatives depends on factors outside of the taxonomy itself. Those are aligning with core business strategies, understanding your users, using data and analytics to drive insight, determining your technology capabilities, and most important, and the focus of this presentation, governance. Today, we'll be taking you through a high-level review of organizational capabilities gained with a governance program, including best practices for a mature taxonomy governance program, highlighted by the 3 case studies we will be reviewing. So first, let's take a look at the key takeaways from this webinar for those of you who need to implement a plan or those in a leadership position who need to justify investing in taxonomy governance. What are those capabilities that an organization gains when implementing the elements of a taxonomy governance plan? Do make note as we walk through these capabilities that each of them has dependencies on the others to be effective. That is why a holistic governance plan we will be discussing today is required for a mature taxonomy governance. So the first one, automation and AI enablement. With most industries moving towards some level of automated processes or AI initiatives, the key governance capabilities would be data quality. Governance ensures AI accuracy and reliability. Poor quality data, that's specifically missing values, inaccuracies, implicit biases, which are those you don't have visibility into determining their relevance, all lead to incorrect predictions and unreliable AI results. Poor quality data without human in the loop will cause more resource expenditures, time, people power, or even failure in real-world scenarios. Think of the last experience you had with a phone tree chatbot. How well did that go?
Data quality is the foundational capability for not only AI, but also content strategy initiatives. Poor data quality can cause an AI venture to fail. At Factor, we often repeat that old maxim, garbage in, garbage out. However, even if AI initiatives aren't part of your near-term plans, working toward improved data quality is a great goal because at the end, you still have improved the findability and usability of your data.
Great, and content analytics. Do you know if your content is performing as intended? Is it supporting your business initiatives? Each piece of content should have a goal or purpose assigned to it and associated metrics. Otherwise, you're only producing content for the sake of content. Without accurate metadata that is consistently applied or tagged in your content, there are very few ways to know if your content is serving its intended purpose.
Standardization and consistency is really one of those capabilities you can't make progress on without some sort of governance framework to regulate who is doing what and when and how that impacts the enterprise. A governance program will enable you to regulate tool and workflow use across a given ecosystem, to reduce ambiguity in your comms, and overall to promote alignment across the different business groups.
Great. And then content lifecycle management. It's something very fundamental to all of governance. Are you confident that your public-facing content is current with the most up-to-date and consistent messaging? Whether it's about legally required statements or product information, out-of-date content reflects poorly on your brand. Content lifecycle management through taxonomy tagging ensures stale content can be reviewed and removed.
One of the most important functions of taxonomy governance is that it helps an organization normalize who has decision-making power over specific domains. This enables future growth because in times of change, everyone knows who needs to sign off on that updated brand name or new tool implementation instead of spinning their wheels trying to figure out next steps.
Great. Now that we've wrapped up our talk about capabilities, we would like you to put your 2 top priorities of the capabilities within your organization that are most important to you. So if you could go ahead and use the polling that just popped up now to add check the marks next to your 2 priorities, that would be great. Okay, then I'll let you all finish up that poll. I'm going to take a look at those results in a little bit, but I'm going to move on now to the next portion of our talk here. So how do you acquire these capabilities within your organization? You first need to understand what capabilities you already possess and those you need to work toward. One of the first activities Factor conducts with its clients is a taxonomy maturity assessment to understand where they are in their journey so that we can help them tailor the right roadmap to get them to where they want to be. Typically, we use this as a self-determined maturity assessment to help organizations understand and internalize the maturity of their capabilities to support governance initiatives. So let's go through each of the stages quickly to give you an idea of what the organizational characteristics and capabilities are at each level of maturity. So first, the accidental stage. Taxonomy changes at this stage are reactive, random, ad hoc, and may feel like fire drills. Changes are made to solve immediate pain for a single group of stakeholders that don't often consider the long-term impacts or needs of the greater organization. In stage 2, the grassroots stage, there are some people, often subject matter experts, that see what changes need to be made to improve the taxonomy and how. Personal heroics, and therefore singular points of failure, can play a large role at this stage. In stage 3, the emerging stage, we can see emerging awareness for needs to manage your taxonomy changes comprehensively and in a regular way. It is a tipping point and a critical stage where things can go 2 ways. You can capitalize on improvements and begin to embed them in a governance program, or you can relapse through the lack of resources, attrition, or alignment to a less mature stage of governance that relies more on people power and human heroics. Stage 4. This is the established phase of taxonomy governance. All components of a full taxonomy governance plan are in place. Roles are clearly defined. Everyone from taxonomy administrators to the executive level understand their role and agree about the need to maintain the taxonomy. And in stage 5, the mastery stage, this is the universal adoption of the governance plan. This stage can be an elusive unicorn in many cases, but the benchmarks that define mastery should be goals of your organization regardless. Those benchmarks are Taxonomy governance is a core capability that is staffed, resourced, and prioritized as essential for sustaining the taxonomy. The taxonomy change workflows are constantly optimized and improved. Taxonomy change is embraced as a natural and essential part of taxonomy improvement. And taxonomy changes are strategic and forward-thinking. Taxonomy changes are regular, orderly, and nothing to be feared. Do be aware no one can jump from a 1 to a 5, so be realistic with yourself and patient as you work your way up the ladder. Our mantra at Factor has become, you can't skip steps. It takes patience, planning, and execution on your objectives to make progress as you climb this ladder. We will require a roadmap and ongoing effort at each stage. Governance is not a one and done endeavor.
So let's take a look at the previous poll results before we move on to the next poll question. All right, it looks like the biggest response, 58%, was data quality. Yeah, we absolutely see data quality as a challenge that is top of mind for most of our customers. So neck and neck here, it looks like our automation and AI enablement, along with standardization and consistency. So, and that reflects kind of an evolution that's going on in the broader world. Primarily, our customers have been concerned with standardization and consistency to really drive business capabilities, but now that is actually something that you need for automation and AI enablement, and that's what's driving a lot of the need to standardize, to have better governance. And then we also have content analytics. Any kind of content dense organization, content rich organization is going to need to track the performance of that content. So that's a very fundamental piece that we see a lot. Content lifecycle management. Governance is fundamental to content lifecycle management. We have encountered organizations where content just proliferates. Anybody can create anything and it becomes the Wild West. So governance is really fundamental to that. And then scalability, last but certainly not least, because especially with automation and AI taking hold, content is proliferating and taxonomies can proliferate, and being able to scale that is really critical these days. All right. So our next poll, go ahead and take us into our next poll, Paula.
Great. So where do you see yourself in the maturity scale? We want to hear from you. Please put your number in the response in the chat. We have a guess where a lot of people who are coming to us looking for governance help. We have a guess of where you will be, but we will see later on. So please put that in the chat.
So 2 to 3, 3, 3.
Yeah,
somewhere in a range from 2 to 4, 2, 3, 4. Consultant 3, meaning maybe that you are a consultant or you're part of a consulting organization. 4, 2. Okay, pretty broad responses there, but I think Paula, what you were getting at earlier is that it tends to cluster around 3.
3. Yes, that's where a lot of people who are looking towards governance understand the fact that they need governance and are looking for to move up that to the next level of 4 and established. Typically seek out then more resources. So yes, so welcome everybody. So hopefully this will help you move up your maturity scale. So that takes us actually to the next section of our presentation here. So how do you move up the maturity scale? The foundational work, which will help you reach your maturity taxonomy goals, depend on the development of these 5 essential components of taxonomy governance. We will go through each at a high level, but each component consists of elements that need to be documented and action plans or roadmaps created to guide your strategy where your organization needs to mature. So first off, document the taxonomy domains. Define what each taxonomy domain is and what it isn't. Who owns that domain? Where is the system of record or source of truth for those domains? What type of governance exists for those roles and are defined within those domains? Next is the document, the systems or system involved in the domains. What is the name of the system and a description of it? Can you do taxonomy modeling? Does it have capabilities like inputs, outputs, or even more complex ontology or knowledge graph functionality? Then there are the roles involved in your taxonomies. Help with accountability and action clarity. What is the role name and its description? What are the types of interactions that each role has in the taxonomies? What are the permissions of that role? And how often does each role interact with the taxonomies? Next, document actions taken within the taxonomy. And for every high impact type of taxonomy change, you will need to describe the following: the audience, who needs to know about the change? The message, what do they need to know? The channel of communication, how you will tell them, and describe and define the management actions taken for each taxonomy change: add, edit, delete, etc. Lastly, you must create your change management communication plan. This is a pivotal part of your governance strategy, which will create and drive transparency. We'll go into more detail of this in one of our upcoming case studies. So we'll come back to this element a little bit later.
Thanks, Paula. So now that we've reviewed some of the best practices, we're going to talk about our case studies, specifically case studies around three important capabilities: standardization and consistency, scalability, and content strategy change management. These case studies share not only taxonomy governance problems, but also a setting. They all occurred across different engagements at a Fortune 100 technology company that has brought Factor in on taxonomy projects for over 7 years. Although each of these projects took place at the same company, they happened at different times and each one had a different primary stakeholder. So our first case study deals with standardization and consistency as governed by a documentation program. And when we're talking about documentation, we're talking about a really wide range of practices. Anything from a post-it on your desk reminding you what boxes to check when adding a new term, to a fully realized enterprise wiki. In our experience, we don't really see taxonomy programs that completely lack documentation. It's mostly orgs where there are multiple documentation paradigms happening. IT is documenting stuff here, the taxonomist is putting stuff here, the business group has stuff over there somehow. There's nothing wrong with this. I mean, these are completely reasonable responses to organizational pressures, and it's certainly better than having no documentation. But the lack of a single source of truth can really hold a taxonomy program back from achieving more mature capabilities. So for our client, their enterprise taxonomy program was dealing with some significant documentation problems. In practice, this looked like that documentation management was no longer staffed within the business. They lost the taxonomist position that had previously managed that stuff and could no longer assign that work to a full-time employee. Also, lots of documentation accumulated over time, and not just in places you might expect like a wiki, but also in kind of random internal digital presences across the enterprise. The documentation paradigm was quite siloed, which made it unsustainable and drove it to become outdated. This made it really difficult for business and IT users to complete tasks related to the taxonomies, like checking the terms available for tagging or making sure the consuming system integration functioned correctly. All these changes meant that the overall maturity of the documentation program backslid and the client lost knowledge management capabilities. This also caused friction because in a lot of ways, it's more difficult to adjust to a less mature environment than to work on upgrading one. So since so few resources were devoted to documentation and the ecosystem was highly reliant on personal heroics, we would call this a pretty solid 2 on our maturity scale. And I'd be interested if any of these problems we just talked about sound familiar to you. Feel free to put a yes in the chat so we can see if they're resonating. And I'll pause for a moment to give folks a minute. Awesome.
All right,
I'm
we see
seeing.
some yeses coming in.
Good to know. That's great. Hopefully our solutions and outcomes will resonate too. So in terms of staffing, the client called us in as contractors to do the heavy lift of fixing his issues. Knowing there was not going to be a full-time employee running this work was also a useful data point for the actual process of consolidating all the information into a single wiki space, since we knew our final product needed to be relatively low effort for them to maintain. In practice, our actual consolidation process to prepare for this migration included a lot of activities that probably sound pretty familiar to you, like an inventory of existing content and a content gap analysis. What I wish we had done earlier, because it was so helpful to assessing and to eventually structuring the content, was identifying our core audiences for the wiki, which was made difficult by how many locations from which we sourced content. We discovered there were three main groups to which this wiki needed to speak. Taxonomists, who care about modeling requirements and how to use the taxonomy management software to meet them. Business groups, who care about being able to use the taxonomies in their end system to tag content and to request changes. And IT, who cares about making sure the data flows from the taxonomy management system the taxonomist is using to the content platforms used by the business groups. We decided to create three different branches of the wiki page tree that are clearly labeled so that members of these groups can identify where they belong and quickly orient themselves to the most relevant content. And to be honest, we're even now still refining the documentation, in part because we got hit with a taxonomy system migration in the middle of this process, so the content needed more updates. But our in-progress results include a reduced level of effort for the documentation manager and users. Instead of maintaining multiple sources of truth, the client just has to worry about maintaining one, and the business users just have to search for information in one. Also, a more user-friendly single source of truth helps increase accountability. There shouldn't be questions about who has agreed to do what and the downstream impacts of their actions. It's really easy to just consistently point people to the wiki. We see this as part of an overall strategy of transparent communication around taxonomy management. People get more excited about the work when they see one source of truth means one aligned answer, and they feel less confusion. Okay, so we're going to pause for a moment, because on the next mouse click, an arrow is going to appear on that maturity scale in the bottom right corner of the slide that's going to show the progress we made through our engagement. So based on everything I just told you, I'd like everyone to guess what number that arrow is going to appear above. So I'll pause to let folks put their guesses in chat.
We needed a drum roll sound bite.
So far, 3 4s, 1 3, another 4, another 3. It's 3, I'm incorrect. 4, 3. Great, another 3. I think that's good enough. Let's do the reveal. Here we go.
Ta-da! So y'all were actually pretty much right on the money. I can just you guys are governance experts now. I can kick back and take it easy this presentation. So yeah, you're all absolutely right that the client definitely increased their maturity with this documentation project. So I think this is an example of an edge case on the maturity scale. So I was really glad to see a mix of 3s and 4s in the chat. And I think this is because the framework we developed was a bit beyond the kind of incompleteness of the routines that characterize a phase 3. But I don't necessarily think it got quite to that solid level 4 with a fully developed framework. But I think it's absolutely true that depending on, in that organization where a given stakeholder sat and their experience of the project, we might see a mix of 3s and 4s of the edge case. So great job, everyone. Okay, so our next case study is on scalability, which often goes hand in hand with that standardization capability we just spent time talking about. Factor had previously been instrumental in creating a governance plan for the stakeholders taxonomy program, but the organization changed so much in the 4-ish years since it had last been updated that it was basically a new org structure populated with almost entirely new people by the time we got called in to revise the plan about 2 years ago. Because the previous workflows were so outdated, the governance process at that time was almost entirely reactive, which was an issue for a taxonomy program intended to serve different business units across the enterprise. In action, this looked like that a factor employee was responsible for routine maintenance as well as implementing any requested taxonomy changes. Nobody on the client side had the right experience and bandwidth to manage these tasks, so it was highly dependent on the factor team. If our team member didn't know how to do it or even wasn't available at the right time, different people might complete the same tasks in different ways with different outcomes. Additionally, a couple of our stakeholders had been there for the previous governance work and felt really protective of it. Taxonomists and other information managers often have to fight really hard for their program, so it makes sense that there would be a strong emotional reaction to changing something they worked so hard on. To avoid conflict with these stakeholders, our primary stakeholder directed us not to widely publicize any ad hoc changes we made, and that made it more difficult for the changes to make an impact. And finally, even though we were trying to tackle an overriding governance question, Factor was accountable to 2 different stakeholders on 2 different work streams with 2 different timelines. We had our business users who had strong preferences around the front-end taxonomy experience and content platforms, and our enterprise taxonomy stakeholder with strong preferences around the back-end flow taxonomy data. Because our stakeholders weren't aligned, there were gaps between what the taxonomy modeling supported and what the business required. And so here we have another example of an edge case, except here we're starting out with the edge case. Because there was an existing, albeit kind of uncared for and maybe even unloved, governance framework, this stakeholder wasn't entirely reliant on the individual heroics that characterize a phase 2, but didn't quite have the regularity of the routines we see in phase 3. So if any of those problems I just described sound familiar to you, y'all know what to do. I'd love to see a yes in chat so we know they're resonating.
At least one yes.
That's not nothing.
Anyone else? Another one? Yes. 4. One more, and I think we have a quorum. Okay. Let's continue.
Awesome. A commanding 4. Okay. So despite our best efforts, just having conversations with our stakeholders wasn't adequately addressing the issues. So we introduced an artifact we began calling our action matrix to help us establish proactive governance processes. Our initial draft was based on our understanding of the previous workflow paradigm and existing reactive processes. When we started workshopping it with stakeholders, they recognized their past work reflected back at them and felt less defensive. This helped better prepare them to collaborate on the information problem, and the artifact itself also offered an alternate focus aside from their interpersonal issues. This was a really important breakthrough in facilitating communication between them. By using the action matrix artifact, we also began to understand what business requirements needed to be met by the taxonomy modeling. For example, we created a workflow that allows business users to ingest subsets of enterprise taxonomies tailored to their needs, while ensuring those terms were consistently modeled to conform with enterprise standards. So if marketing needed terms in a flat list because their consuming system couldn't handle hierarchies, but product needed the hierarchies because it was critical to their tagging interface, our modeling workflow supported both use cases in a single vocabulary. For those times when changes do need to be made, we clearly establish timelines, responsibilities, and levels of effort for everything from, a new campaign is dropping tomorrow and we really need this term added, to a major org restructure is happening and we're going to be making changes over several months. In other words, we proactively modeled the governance processes for the most common changes and established trust and expectations around any unforeseen challenges. And getting all this down wasn't a one and done session for us. It took a few meetings, but at the end, our stakeholders had been given space to process the changes and come to terms with why and how they were being made. And getting them in a couple sessions together also allowed them to hash out their disagreements directly without us necessarily having to referee or mediate. We were just there as factor to focus on the information problem. And they even realized that some of these disagreements were outside the scope of our work and took them offline. Perhaps most importantly for us, we were able to align around a shared set of goals to guide our modeling efforts. This meant the modeling could better serve the enterprise instead of just the area in which our primary stakeholder had the most influence. Finally, it improved everyone's working relationship because they have a better sense of what other people know and the boundaries of their own roles. I think this process affirmed for Factor that a mature governance workflow isn't just about catastrophizing everything that can go wrong, although that's certainly my favorite part, but about understanding what resources and levels of effort are required to ultimately support the business and what the stakeholders are going to do when there is that last minute change. Okay, so I think y'all know the drill now. Like last time, we're going to pause and have you guess that final maturity phase in chat.
Lots of fours, even a 4.5, but really landing a lot around 4. Yeah, should we go ahead and reveal? Let's do
Let's
it.
reveal. Okay, so it's really funny that y'all guessed 4 because like as we were developing this presentation, I was like, I think this is a 4, but then I was like, am I being too nice about this project I worked on? And I ultimately pulled it back to a very advanced 3, but now y'all are starting to kind of convince me that maybe I should have left it at a 4. And I hope this is also a demonstration of like how subjective some of this is. It's really dependent on kind of your POV on the project itself. So the reason I was thinking about a very advanced 3 was because we did have that existing single source of truth that we discussed in our previous case study. So that was an easy way to document the roles and actions we figured out in the action matrix. But I was still a little worried that like maybe the primary stakeholder wasn't making those actions like quite as routine across like different people with similar responsibilities. But I also think like we did introduce like a pretty comprehensive framework, even if they were still like working on adopting it. So I think 4 is like, especially based on the information I gave you, like a really good guess. And I would say like that's not like an incorrect guess. But I also want to emphasize, like, I hope this also shows you how much impact even like a half step or like maybe even just like 1 step forward on that maturity scale can have on an org, and also how many resources it might take to move that half step or single step. So that's it for my case studies. I'm now going to throw it over to Paula to talk about content strategy change management.
Great. Thanks, Connor. So this is our last case study. Again, it is with the same Fortune 100 technology company. And then the case study itself is going to focus specifically on the content strategy for the marketing division. The problem they were facing was they needed a change management plan for the new division-wide content strategy and taxonomy governance initiatives. So the things that Connor was talking about were some of the stepping stones to being able to fully put in place a change management and even a comprehensive content strategy. We have been working with them for many years, and it took us several years just to get to the point where we could start thinking about a content strategy that was comprehensive and involved several hundred people. So the problems that they were facing, they were certainly no stranger to marketing plans and campaigns, but they had never rolled out an internal initiative this broadly. That would impact hundreds of people focused around content strategy and taxonomy as a critical organizational asset. The challenges they were facing were insufficient organizational alignment on how the new content governance strategy would be managed and communicated. There was also a lack of accountability through the absence of strong organizational direction and without support of executive leadership. and understanding roles and responsibilities. There was also inconsistent understanding across the division for the role of taxonomy, metadata, and content governance that played in producing their valuable client-focused content assets, and most importantly, a missing communication and training strategy to implement this initiative. So orchestrating this significant change management program needed careful planning for the best chance of a new content strategy and taxonomy governance to be widely adopted. So while I move into our solutions, if you could just please share again, like Connor says, you know the drill, where if you've faced any of these challenges, put one of those in a chat. Yes, power of incremental process, definitely. Inconsistent messaging. Yeah, very much so.
Anyone else? Thank you, Anna. Oh, 2 organizational alignments right in a row.
Yes, we get quite a bit of that within our clients. So to move on and talk about where they started, they were about at a 2. And the client, when we began this process, had siloed processes enabling by several heroic subject matter experts, but the entire marketing team was not on the same page. Nor did they have the same understanding of what the solution would look like or a common vocabulary in which to create a holistic content strategy. So now let's take a look at the solution. So Factor was able to identify and create the different training and communication components necessary for a successful rollout for long-term success in the taxonomy and governance program. So first, we established with the client why a training and communications plan was so important to change management. It helps create alignment by breaking down the silos. It helps the skills development and leveling up the entire organization's knowledge base. It brings consistency to governance processes and creates better, more efficient content workflows. It aids in the continuous improvement while giving an organization the ability to measure content performance, creating accountability for the performance and content to meet business needs. Our solution, therefore, is comprised of a comprehensive training outline and communications plan. To discuss quickly some of the best practice elements of each of these components, they'd be: for the training module, defining the training session and its goals. Create learning objectives for each session. What can the participant do after that they could not do before, and why does that matter? And importantly, a feedback mechanism to confirm the trainings are effective. For the communication plan, you need to determine your goals and objectives for each audience. Defining the metrics for a communication plan success. Explore the campaign branding, look, feel, tagline, and core messages, and determine the timeline. You also need to confirm communication channels and delivery materials for each mode. Determine the order of delivery and cadence of communication materials for each audience. And lastly, again, establish a feedback mechanism. So for the outcome, our client was through the implementation of the training and communication plans. They would therefore be able to establish and leverage their new capabilities, such as organizational alignment and accountability by codifying standardized roles and responsibilities, the adoption of a division-wide taxonomy governance framework supporting that content lifecycle management, and a durable change management strategy that could grow and adapt to the organization's future needs. So again, like we did with Connor, you know the drill. Can you guess the final maturity number and put that into the chat, please? 3, 3.5, 3.5. Like Connor said, y'all doing really great. You don't need us.
But if you do, we're here to help.
Of course. Because we always think we know what we can do, but as we know in these case studies, it's not easy to get there.
Ooh, we have a
Oh,
3.8.
8. Oh,
All right.
I'd love to know more about that 0.8, but yes. Yes. So the final reveal, I think we can go there. Yes. And so like Connor, I also debated somewhere between the 3 and the 4 area. They are still in process with this, but they have rolled out their training and communication plan. And ultimately, it has been the key to managing that change for the adoption of their taxonomy governance programs. And then while it's attempting to ignore this non-insignificant effort, it was a crucial element to the success in the client's taxonomy governance. As we say at Factor, you can't skip steps when it comes to developing and implementing a widely adopted mature governance program. And so while this looks like you're skipping a little bit of steps, there was a lot of background information that we just couldn't fit into the whole case study, but they had been working on this content strategy for many years. And so incremental steps were happening along the way. And so we really were able to get them a little further up in the maturity. So to finalize talking about this content strategy, I just want to say it's not enough to build the taxonomies, structures, documentation, and workflows if you do not train and communicate your taxonomy service with the right message to the right audiences at the right time within your ecosystems.
Thanks, Paula. All right, I know we've thrown a lot of information at you so far, and I do appreciate you hanging in there with us. So we'll go through a summary of our key takeaways from today's session. First, your governance capabilities should fit the stage of your taxonomy governance maturity. Not everyone can have the most mature program all the time, but everyone has their own sphere of influence and can figure out incremental improvements that work for their team, thinking about that comment about the power of incremental progress, and that work for their enterprise environment. We also want to mention that a less mature governance program that can be sustained over the long term is better than a more mature program that eventually degrades. It's usually harder to advocate to revive the work after a setback and any perceived or real capability loss. And if you do find yourself in the situation of trying to increase your maturity level, do remember that you can't skip steps, as Paula reminded us at the beginning of our presentation. If you're at a 3 right now, it's going to take some time, resourcing, and everyone's favorite activity, networking, to get to a 4, and even more of that to get to a 5, right? And that's why we encourage you to make connections with other people in your organization. Governance is only sustainable by socializing your work and inviting other people to join you. It's the key to establishing credibility, gaining buy-in, and supporting transparency throughout your organization.